So hi, it's going to be pretty tough to follow Gabe. What I heard of Gabe's was pretty sick, so let's have a go anyway. I'd like to start with a question, but let's start. I'd like to ask you, how many of you are completely up to date on your organization's mandatory training? So whether that's your fire safety, your HR, your manual handling, blah, blah, blah. How many of you are completely up to date on that training? And please put your answers in the chat. So hi, my name is Oliver Betts Richards, and you won't remember me from any other information security conferences, but I'm an information security analyst at the University of Derby. I've dabbled in information security awareness training for the last couple of years now. Much of that experience has been virtual, so during COVID times, and I've done a couple of in-person sessions as well. The aim of this session is to give some advice and some practical tips to help us with both of those settings. It shouldn't really matter whether we're virtual or in person for this. Because most importantly, I want you to join me in making more impactful, interesting, and resonating content. This won't be a self-deprecating talk, but the content is based on lessons that I've learned and things that I feel I could have done better. And if you want to find out more about me, you can find me on the socials at the foot of the deck. I'm on Twitter, Discord, and LinkedIn, all at Hail Nolly. There. And if you have kind things to say, please join the conversation on Twitter and use the hashtag BeerCon3, as you can see on the deck. And if you have unkind things to say, I'd still like to hear them, but please DM me on Twitter, and I'm happy to talk about anything in this conversation. So you're probably wondering why we're even having this conversation if I'm saying that information security awareness training doesn't work. People are still clicking on phishing links. People are still giving away their credentials. And Verizon is still saying that most breaches have some form of mysterious human element to them. So you might think it's about how our customers understand technology, but I think it's more fundamental than that. Most people don't understand what we're talking about. Most people don't understand our terminology. And here's the kicker, most people probably don't care either. I know that information security is important to you and me. It's just, otherwise, why would we be here in the first place? It's just a lot less important for just about everybody else, and we need to empathize with those people. Because we see all the time that we're busy, that we're overworked, and reaching burnout. But guess what? Everybody else is just as busy as we are. And it's our job to inspire them to care more about information security, as well as the rest of the cognitive plates that they're spinning on the daily. All hope is not lost. I hope that this conversation can give you some practical steps on how to help you build effective information security awareness campaigns. And what I want you to take away from this is that most people don't know anything about information security, particularly most adult professionals, and they probably care even less. And it's our job to change that. And there's quite a lot of work to do before we can even get started in our campaign. And most of it doesn't even involve information security. But please stay with me. Planning an information security awareness campaign is more than about information security and how to communicate with people. You need to have empathy with your colleagues. And you'll probably hear me say empathy quite a lot during this talk. So that's one of the most important things to me here. Because your colleagues have day jobs to do that doesn't involve directly caring about information security. And they're most likely as under-resourced as we are. And they're being asked to engage with us on top of all those things. I can't see the chat right now, but I know from conversations at work and with others, I know that a heck of a lot of people are not up to date on their mandatory training. So how on earth can we expect people to engage with us and something that's important to us when we don't engage fully with something that may be important to somebody else? Oh crap. I've toggled through the slides, sorry. I've gone really wrong here. We also need to remember that it's horrifically difficult to do this alone. You need to identify who you need to support you. And I'm very lucky to have supportive colleagues around me on everything that I've done on information security awareness training. You need to remember that your campaign is a project. There's a start, a middle, and an end. So identify your learning outcomes, identify the narrative of your campaign, and identify what you want your audience to get from your campaign. You need to do a heck of a lot more planning than just our to-do lists. You need to identify the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, and the how of what you want to say. And that's where a communications plan comes in. And we'll get more on that later. You need to remember that you're not an educationalist. And that's not an insult. I'm just willing to bet that most people in this conversation aren't trained educators. And I'm not either. You need to remember that marketing is important as well. Because you need to get your message out there. And I'm willing to bet that most people in this conversation aren't trained marketers either. So document all the skills you need to put together your campaign and the people you need to support you. The most important thing for me here is to empathize with your colleagues and try and think a bit beyond the boundaries of information security. And it's critical to know the skills you need. It's also critical that you have some content. And this is where you need to think about what's useful to your organization. You need to identify the risks and challenges facing your organization. You need to remember that every organization is unique. Every organization has its own people, its imperatives, its values, its cultures, its politics. Every single one is different. So there's little merit, therefore, in prioritizing talks about picking up USB sticks in the parking lot when your organization prohibits using them. And similarly, I think it's negligent to avoid talking about securing paper files if your organization gets through more paper than the local library. So I need you to think about your audience. I need you to think about information security and how it affects them and their challenges. And that's where your educationalists are your friends. Your audience might not learn the way you do. So reach out to them to help guide you towards creating a campaign that will engage as many people as possible. And document this information as well. It's critical to have your thoughts in order. And most importantly, identify what your organization needs and what your audience need as well. So we've got some great content ideas. You might think now's the time we can probably start writing. I'm really sorry to say there's a little bit more thinking to do and a bit more exciting work we need to do first. And you need a plan. You need a plan that's got a bit more detail on it than Oliver plans to talk about phishing emails today. You need a communications plan. And luckily for you, I'm here to tell you what that is. This is where your project managers are your friends as well. What are you going to say? What kind of content are you going to put out? Are you going to put out presentations, articles, screensavers, digital signage, blah, blah, blah? What kind of content do you want to get out there? Who are you going to say it to? Where are you going to say it? How are you going to say it? When are you going to say it? Who is going to say it? It doesn't necessarily have to be you doing all the talking. And I strongly urge you to identify all the communication channels you have in your organization and rinse every single one of them, because we need to get our message out there to as many people as we possibly can. And this is also where your marketing friends come in. Marketing is much more than about sales calls from vendors pitching us the same stuff over and over and over again. Marketing will probably be your biggest supporters. And they need to know there's a campaign in the first place. And this way we have to empathize with them as well, because this is not their day job. They've probably got heaps more campaigns on the go as well, whether that's fire safety, HR, new systems, blah, blah, blah. They've probably got lots of stuff on their plates, and we need to work with them to land your message amongst the constant stream of information overload that your colleagues are experiencing every day. and support them to get the word out there, and don't expect them to do all the work. And document, document, document. The idea here is to have a working document for your campaign and how it's all going to take shape. And the key thing I want to get across here is to rinse every single communications channel that you have available to you. So we're about halfway through, and this is my rookie talk, so I'll be immensely grateful for any feedback in the chat. I'd like to know how I'm doing. I'll be very grateful for anything you've got to say. And as we're halfway through, I thought we'd have a bit of a recap, because we've documented all the skills that we need and the people we need to support us. And we've planned our content, and we've got a communications plan that maps how the campaign will all come together. But there's a tiny bit more work to do before we can get started. Because it's one thing to have a great campaign lined up. It's one thing to have a lot of great content. But unfortunately, most people in our organizations need some sort of permission to do things. And that's where your awesome documentation comes in. You need to sell this to your boss. I mean, presumably they care about information security, so we should be off to a good start there. And that needs to be sold to your boss's boss as well. I mean, hopefully they care about information security, so we might even get a bit more traction there. But crucially, they can use their influence to get a bit higher and a lot wider. They can help you get out into your department, so in your IT department as well, because information security awareness training isn't just for non-IT people. They can also help you influence the most senior people outside of IT and engage your biggest stakeholder group, and that's your customers. Because your senior leaders need to be engaged in talking about your campaign as well, because their employees, their staff, spending time engaging with your training takes away from their time to do their day job, and their managers need to support this. So it's critical to get support for your campaign and get the most influential people on board. And this is a big milestone. So we've planned an awesome campaign. We've got some awesome content lined up. Crucially, we've got the buy-in to launch it. So now it's time to put the content together. Please, please, please lay off the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt, because this is no time for fear mongering. Think about how often you've been motivated to get out of there and do your fire safety training when you've seen an incident on the news. And empathize, again, with your colleagues. You're fighting for their attention, so think about what they care about and what you want from them. Most people probably care about data breaches as much as you do, and I do, about how our expenses, for example, are budgeted when we go to conferences. Never forget that people are giving up their time to engage with you. So produce content that most people can understand. Most adult professionals I don't think can give a definition or a working definition of a phishing email, let alone a zero-day vulnerability. And keep your content short and sweet. Brevity is your friend. And make your content accessible. Remember that not everybody who engages with your content will have the same ability as you do. So when you're doing presentations and articles, for example, make sure your images have descriptive alt tags or use closed captions where you can, like I'm doing on this presentation here. Now, I have the benefit and the privilege of a great mentor supporting me on this talk. And I also have the benefit and the privilege of an amazing colleague to support me. So get somebody to peer review your content, because we can spend hours crafting the best articles, the best presentations, and we can miss all sorts of horrors. And so fresh eyes will always enhance the quality of your work. And most importantly, empathize, 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 and make the content accessible. Never forget that people spend time with our content is time they're spending away from other things they can be doing. And having this in the bank is another big milestone, because we've got our content and we're ready to go. So we've got a great campaign lined up. We've got a lot of buy-in, content's in the bank, and we're ready to go. So it's time to get the content out there. Now it's time to talk about your content. Now it's time to talk to your colleagues about your content. Now it's time to ask your colleagues to talk to their friends about your content, because people need to know that your message is out there. Because you need to get your material in front of as many eyes as you can. So get yourself out there and present. People need to hear about information security in a way that resonates with them, and the way in which they can make more informed and more secure decisions about their personal lives online, and also when they're at work. And you are the key to that, because you are the ones that are empowering people to make positive changes to our collective security postures. And the key from here is to get that content out there as far and wide as possible, because we have to make that change and we have to affect that change. And now that's a heck of a lot of work going out of the way. And now it's time to celebrate, because this is a huge milestone. We've done a lot of work with our colleagues, and hopefully we've made a massive impact. So it's really time to give ourselves a bit of a pat on the back and celebrate a little bit. So the content's out there. Our articles have been read, the presentations have been watched, and it feels amazing to share knowledge, doesn't it? But there's only one thing we have to do. So it's one thing knowing we've put out some awesome content, but we also need to know that we're not howling into the void. You need to know if your audience have learned anything, and you need to know if your campaign has made an impact. You need to know if it's worth doing in the first place, really. And there are some handy and quite easy ways we can do this. You can invite comments on your articles, for example. We can encourage people to give feedback during the presentations, or encourage them to fill out evaluation forms after them. I've even done quizzes during sessions just to get a bit of a gauge of how our messages are getting across. And talk to people. I think that's one of the most important things here, to talk to people, invite all the feedback you can get. It's critical that we get every bit of it, so we know we're not howling into the void and we're making a positive impact on all of our collective security postures. So what are the key things I want you to take away from this conversation that we're having right now? And I'm going to read these all from clockwise from the top left. And that's that most people don't know anything about information security, and probably care even less. And that's not designed to be an insult. It just, in my experience, most adult professionals don't. And it's our job to change that. And we need to empathize with our colleagues and think beyond the boundaries of information security in the language that we use and the approaches that we take. You need to identify what your organization needs and what your audience needs from you, and to use all the channels that you have available. It's critical to get support for your campaign from as far and as high and as wide as possible. Because we are the ones that are empowering people to make positive changes to our collective security postures. And get feedback any way you can. It's important to know you're not howling into the void and making a positive impact. And that's been my lessons learned for this conversation. So thank you for listening. I hope you have got something from the conversation we've had. I'd like to give some thank yous out. And I'd like to thank Stu Coulson for mentoring me through this experience and giving me so many things to learn. I'm very grateful for all the time he's given me, and make sure you watch his talk at 5 o'clock. I want to thank the beer farmers for putting on this amazing conference and accepting my presentation in the first place. I also want to thank Ed Tucker and Tracy Good for all the insights they've shared with me as I've been developing this talk. I want to thank my colleague Raina Davey for supporting me to deliver every bit of information security awareness content I've done. And I want to thank my wife for her encouragement and supporting me and support for me during this experience. I wouldn't have been able to do that without her either. And most importantly, I want to thank you all for giving me your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that you've got something from it. So make sure you stick around to hear Drew Jones, and he's going to help us master blind SQL injections. I'm sure that would be great as well.